Is the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Barletta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My constituent, Senior Correctional Officer Eric Williams of Nanticoke, Pennsylvania, proudly worked in a United States prison. He was brutally murdered by convicted gang assassin Jesse Conway on February 13th, 2013. I applaud the decision by the prosecutors to seek the death penalty for this terrible crime. And I want to thank his co-workers, some of them who are in town today, for the job they do every day to make our nation a safer place. One simple bill that would help the 39,000 plus employees working in our federal prison system is the Eric Williams Correctional Officer Safety Act, introduced by David McKinley, Tom Marino, and Matt Cartwright. I'm a co-sponsor of the bill, and Pat Toomey has introduced it on the Senate side. It's a simple bipartisan bill that will require the Bureau of Prisons to issue pepper spray to correctional officers and employees in high and medium security prisons. Assistant Commissioner Parker, can you describe the conditions under which pepper spray would be helpful to prison workers, and why would pepper spray be preferable over some other form of non-lethal weapons?
Yes, I'd be happy to. Chemical agents are one of the items that we use for officer protection. When you look at the level of use of force, it's usually the second level, third level up. Once you establish physical force, the chemical agents are available. The only caveat there is to make sure that individuals are trained in the use of chemical agents, the proper use of chemical agents. We issue chemical agents to our officers in Tennessee, especially those working in maximum custody units and high security restricted housing areas. Yes, it's a very productive tool. You have inmates in physical altercations, or even an inmate that may attack an officer. Chemical agents is one of the first resources that would be available to use that. It basically hampers the offender's ability to see. It disorientates them, and so it makes it a lot easier to handle the inmate. Very productive tool.
If I may, as someone who's actually been sprayed with pepper spray, one thing when I was in the NYPD, we had someone who, I was not personally involved with this, who was on drugs and extremely strong, and in a close situation, pepper spray was ineffective. So I'm not opposed to your bill, but what I can say is sometimes a risk in a closed environment is that depending on how it's dispersed, it could affect correctional officers and other prisoners. And additionally, some of these prisoners are pretty brutal people. And if they were to grab the pepper spray, it could have a deleterious effect on correctional officers. But I'll leave that to the folks with the training and the design. But having had the opportunity to be armed with pepper spray, it is a tool, but it isn't foolproof.
Yeah, and in this case, Conway kicked Williams down a flight of stairs before brutally beating him and slashing him to death with two shanks. This may have been a case, had he been able to have something to defend himself, he'd be alive today. One final question. I was a former mayor before I came here, so how will a local police chief, sheriff, or mayor know if a terror inmate will be released into their community, and are you aware of a process for sharing this information?
We often notify police chiefs, district attorneys, judges when we release individuals back into their communities. I would also say that, the process, I'm not aware of a process in regards to a terrorist being released. I would have to defer to BOP to what their policy is on that. But it's very important. An important point that I would point out is knowing that that individual is back in your community is good. But I think we have an interest in knowing where that individual is at. I mean, we don't require them to register. As far as I know, we don't require them to register. I made this point earlier. There's some inmates that are released that we require to register a database. We know when that individual moves to another town or moves to another area. Again, I think that needs to be looked at and needs to be considered because it's important that we be able to track these individuals when they're released.
If I could just interject one quick point. Here's another issue, and you're a former prosecutor. One of the things that we've seen with regard to the prosecutions from, let's say, 2002 for the next several years, and that's why I brought up in the written testimony the different charges. The Justice Department, right after 9/11, properly so, said, you know what, we're not going to wait to plots come to fruition. We're going to interdict. That is the new strategy. And what that has done is that has cast a wide net that has ensnared operational folks like the JIS people in Southern California, who, interestingly enough, were found because of just good local police work by the Torrance Police Department, and then they got, the JTTF involved, the fusion centers. We have to make sure that we share information, but not every person that gets released is going to be of the same threat level, because that net ensnared people who, in some instances, were just violently talking imbeciles, as opposed to operational folks who had a depth of motivation. And that's something that's really important as someone who studies both hate and extremism. We have a matrix that involves how operational is someone, how connected and networked are they, and how shallow or deep are their hatreds. For instance, an article in Think Progress this summer talked about white Aryan prison gangs. They are among the most violent. And indeed, for instance, Aryan Brotherhood of Texas would kill their own members with lye and torture them with fire and things like that, because they were criminal syndicates. But some of these groups will oftentimes partner up with other folks who are outside of their in-group because it's effective for drug dealing, for instance. So we have to look at both the violence, the type of violence, the depth, because what we don't want to do is inundate law enforcement with information that may or may not be specific to an actual terrorist threat. One other point with regard to information sharing that all my colleagues would really have begged me to say, and that is, not only do we want to continue the information sharing, which has been relatively good in the post-9/11 period with the fusion centers and even between federal law enforcement, but there are a lot of us who are former police officers, former FBI agents who are in academia now, who would love to get the opportunity to be able to do some kind of trend analysis, but we don't have access to prisons and prisoners. And that might be something that we should look at, opening up for the appropriate people, local law enforcement as well as academia, to get information. Information is the lifeblood of what we're doing, and in such a fluid situation. And what I'm telling you is my testimony might very well, along with my colleagues and friends here, somewhat more irrelevant 8 months from now than it is today, because of the fluidity of the situation. And when we do share information, what I think is important is that we have some kind of trained person vetting, saying, okay, this person who has no criminal record and merely was ensnared with shallow hatreds and low operational efficiency is not the same as the JIS folks. And that's something that I think is important. But yes, you are completely correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Rankin.